hello. Hello. Let's try this again. I'm not sure what's going on today, but we hanging in there. We're gonna try this again and see if maybe we can get all of our systems connected. Looks like I'm still having some issues with Facebook, but that's okay. Hey, hello. How are you? I'm having like some technical issues. I don't know whether or not there's something going on with Meta today, or if there's some kind of outage. I don't know because I really haven't been on social media all day or this morning. But my systems are kind of going cray over here a little bit. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to push forward. If you are on Facebook, please let me know that you are here. Let me know that you can see me because it's not showing me that anybody is live. I just don't, it just chooses today to not show me who I'm looking at. I'm looking at all my systems and I'm like, okay, what in the world is going on? But it's okay. We're gonna push forward. Because that's what you do, right? Like, you push forward, you keep going because I have an assignment that I have vowed that I am going to do. And if you don't know what I am talking about, let me first introduce myself. My name is Dr. Tiffany. I am a therapist and I am also a relationship expert. And I work with women who are healing and recovering from traumatic relationships. So if you are here, thank you so much. Good. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know you can see and hear me. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. I am late. I usually come on at 12, so I'm a little bit late today. And I'm not going to keep you very long, but today our topic is we're continuing our topic about generational trauma. If you are in here, if you're on Facebook, make sure you hit that share. Let someone know that we're on. We are late, but we are here. So let them know that they still got time. If they're on their lunch break, they still got time to catch me. They still got time. They're right on time, actually. So let them know. But we're going to continue our topic about generational trauma. So yesterday I kind of took a detour a little bit, which really wasn't a detour because I feel like what happened yesterday or what we're seeing in our nation with the school shootings. I feel like some of that is a reflection of things that we have traditionally upheld or let happen, and without any repercussions or minimal repercussions and the proper laws and all that stuff being put in place. So, which is also still feeds into that generational stuff, that systemic stuff, and we'll talk a little bit about systemic stuff today. So, I'm not that much off topic. But today we're going to go back to talking about generational trauma and focus on racism. And I do realize that one of the massacres that occurred about 2 weeks ago up in New York was specifically it was race related. It was a white supremacist. The young man specifically was targeting the Black neighborhood. And so what do we do over here? Well, we talk about hard life topics. So I don't shy away from talking about these things. I don't think anyone, if you're called to work with people, that you shouldn't shy away from things that are happening around the world or happening, because guess what? They're impacting the lives of the people that you're working with every day. And so even though they may not talk to them with you, that does not mean that they're on their mind. And if you are particularly working, you have parents that you know that are working in your at your jobs, or if you're working with parents, or you're working with people who are connected with children, or if you're working with people who are African American or who are Black or of that descent, then you best believe that they are being impacted by when they see things like this. They are being impacted. So even though they may not show you or tell you in their jobs that, hey, you know what, I'm really scared. Like, this really impacted me. This could be close to home. Everybody's not from Mississippi. I'm in Mississippi. But what about those that are in New York that, that may be really concerned about going to work or going to the grocery store, so the concerns are there. And I think that if you work with people, or especially if you're business owners, then you, to some degree, therapists, teachers, you have doctors, you have a responsibility to really validate some of their experience, or at least acknowledge it, and to be aware of their experiences when they come to your job. So today we're talking about generational trauma. generational trauma and the impact of racism. So let's start with talking about what exactly racism is. I don't feel like this needs an introduction. Y'all, I feel like we know what racism is. And for the purpose of today, because I am Black and I personally have experienced racism and discrimination, I will come from the lens of racism as a Black person. So I didn't necessarily go pull this from other nations and other cultures because my experience is not with other cultures. I can't speak for other cultures. Some of this can be generalized to other cultures, but let's be real. When we're talking about the United States of America, which is where I am, when we talk about racism, usually it is towards Blacks, and so racism is the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. So when we're talking about racism, there is one group or one class, one culture, one people is superior and or viewed as superior, and the other is viewed as inferior and are treated inferior, excuse me, and are treated as such. Okay, so how do we see this? Like, when I started thinking about racism, I was like, oh, we could go all different kind of ways with this, and because we see racism in many different ways, that are manifested in many different ways in our nation. And like I said, I'm in the United States. Some people, you may be in a different country, and you may see some of these things even in your own country. But what are some themes that I've noticed, or that I can, especially with clients that I see, that I've noticed have come out of the impact of racism in our nation? One thing that I noticed or have pulled out is the family system. That we've noticed that the family system has been impacted drastically from racism. And this could go back to slavery and the impact of slavery, and all of that can get really deep. And I may mention some of that as I go along. But what we see is the disintegration of the family system as a whole. And yes, that goes back to slavery and how men were usually separated from the women back in those days, and which made it really easy to get to that family system and to pretty much do whatever you want to do in that family system. So the families were not as protected, or families didn't feel as protected because the men, remember, were taken away. But what also happened during that time is that women and children, like, they were witnessing, because of the humiliation and that men were treated pretty much like they were children. And so the families were witnessing how men were being devalued. And so over time, what we see is that we have cultures where, or let's say cultures, because we're talking about, I'm trying to generalize, but not generalize. But we have a race, let's say that. We have a race where the men are not valued to the same degree as the women in the race. And we see that played out in the society, where women are valued a little bit more than men. And I know this to be true, just in my own experience, or with my husband and I. We could go somewhere, we can go sit down and be talking about a loan, with an organization, or with an institution, a bank or something, and they will literally value my voice over my husband's voice. And so we see these things play out and it's probably worse in Mississippi. Let me just be real honest. It's probably worse in Mississippi, because Mississippi is behind the time. They're behind the time, and I hope that some leaders are watching this, because we're behind the time. The rest of the nation is doing a lot more than Mississippi has done to try to bridge those gaps. But what we see is that the men were devalued, and pretty much the women were empowered a little bit more, had a little bit more empowerment than the men. And we've seen that play out throughout the generations. So what are some things that have impacted the family? What do we see? We see powerlessness. We see learned helplessness. We see low self worth, self value. We see fatherlessness. We see, and I talked about the disintegration of the family system. So families are not valued. And typically, because back in slavery times, where children were separated from the parents were separated from each other, husband and wife were separated from each other. And so, what we see now is really a direct correlation to what happened back in slavery time, and where we do not have not traditionally valued family. And what we also see is that family has had even the definition. You'll see this in a lot of Black families, that even the definition of family could include more than just the husband, the wife, the children. It can include extended family, and or it can include somebody else's family. Like, so the definition of family is a little bit different for Black families. So disintegration of family, imbalance of power or family roles. So you will see in certain families, because of going back to slavery, I'm just kind of going back to slavery. What you will see is the rise of mothers having to take on greater responsibility because the fathers, remember, were removed. So the life still had to go on. Family, children still had to be taken care of, and things still had to be done. Work still must go on. So what you see is that the mothers typically acting, because mothers can't be fathers. Let's just go and put that out there. But mothers typically taking on the responsibility of fathers. Or you see children having to take on the responsibility of parents. So then you have what we call in therapy systems parentified children. And parentified children is just a word that describes children who are now acting in a role, or caught between the role of acting as a mother or acting as a father, and still trying to act as a children or as a child. Act as a child. So some other things that we see are the lack of identity, or the we talked about identity yesterday, I think, or the day before. But identity, you see the lack of identity. And particularly, I think a lot of Blacks may struggle with this. And I'm not generalizing this. I just think I see it a lot in the Black culture, because we don't necessarily have a connection to where we came from. And if your family was anything like my family, we don't know any history past great grandma. So now the question becomes, is who am I? Who am I? Where are my roots exactly? So we see a lot of identity or issues with identity around racism, or issues with in the Black families. So another thing that I know a lot of people that can relate to, especially if you are Black and you work in the public area, or expect, don't let you get some education and have to go sit in the boardrooms and all of that, and that's code switching. And I know you like, what in the world is code switching? Code switching is where we talk like this when we at home, but when we get in front of our white friends, or we get in front of, have to go to the bank, or we have to, be professional per se, what we act or say or speak a totally different way. So it's acting one way in public, and then acting another way when you're at home. Some other things that we see is oppression. We see feeling oppression is just feeling like you can't get ahead, or feeling like there's something that's holding you back, or something that's keeping you from moving forward. And I talked a little bit about, or I mentioned, learned helplessness. And then we start seeing generational poverty. All of these are some impact, or the impact on the family, or individuals inside of the family when it comes down to racism. What do we see in society? Like, how has racism shaped our society? We can't talk about racism without talking about privilege. We just can't do it, because the very nature of racism implies that there's a race that's inferior, and then there's a race that's superior. And the superior race usually don't know. Well, I can't say that they don't know. I don't know that they don't know. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't know that there's some privilege that come along with that. There's some privilege that come along with being a part of the superior race. So you may get access to things a little bit easier than someone like me or someone that is black. That and a lot of times the privilege don't know or don't see the privilege, and often it's because it's so common. It's so common for them. And so something that I really love about the last couple years, in our nations that I've kind of watched erupt since the death of George Floyd is that some of the ones that have been in the superior race, quote unquote, are starting to be more aware of their privilege and are starting to create those opportunities where they can stand up and literally bridge the gap between one race or their race and another race. And we see that with different laws that or different moves that have happened. We see that in corporate America. They're starting to have all of these initiatives where they're pushing equality and inclusion, and they're really empowering blacks to really take advantage of opportunities that they traditionally, let's just be honest, have not had opportunity to. Now, as an entrepreneur, now, when entrepreneurship kind of brings a whole new light to that. But traditionally, Black businesses have not done as well as other businesses, and part of that is because we didn't have access to the same resources as other businesses. We didn't have access to resources, or we didn't come from families that had created wealth, and wealth was passed down from one generation to generation. That is the reason why we see a lot of Black families that are not doing as well if you compare them to white families. And we're not even going to talk about the income gap, because the income gap between Blacks and whites is horrendous, and it's even worse for women. They typically doing the same job, they typically get paid more than us. But so now we're starting to see these initiatives starting to be rolled out, which is beautiful, 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 beautiful to watch. So entitlement, white privilege that comes out of that. We also see systemic racism that comes out of that. Systemic racism or institutional racism is another word for that, is a form of racism that is embedded in the laws and regulations of a society or an organization. And it manifests as discrimination in areas such as criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare. And we see that in healthcare because of the disparities in healthcare for minorities is awful. It is awful. I don't even know if I can pull up some stats on the disparity of healthcare in for Blacks. It is the disparities in healthcare is yeah off. I should have had that pulled up. But what we see is that Blacks traditionally have not had, or minorities, I'm Black, so I, haven't had the same access to healthcare as other races. And even with the access, sometimes what studies have shown is that their complaints, even when they go to the doctor and they're talking about or expressing their symptoms, have been dismissed, have really been downplayed and dismissed in healthcare field. I'm not in the healthcare field, in mental health care field, but even in that, sometimes their complaints are dismissed. They're unheard. And so now we go into talking about, like, what microaggressions look like. It's a term that is, how do I say this? I mean, just read the definition. It's a term used for commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitude towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. So we see this sometimes in news outlets that go out, or news articles and headlines that go out that may call out certain races over others. And we even see these with like the shootings. I think I ran across an article on Facebook not too long ago. It was a post or something that talked about, like, how uh, mass shooters that are Caucasian are treated over mass shooters that are black. And we saw that with George Floyd. We saw that with Breonna Taylor. Like, the world has literally, some of the world, some of the world, some of the world has literally been awakened to where these things are actually happening. They're happening. We see that racism. It was something about seeing the video, and I didn't watch the video. It was something about seeing the video of George Floyd that almost like it awakened people that, oh yeah, this is actually happening. This is actually happening. So what do we do? Like, what are some solutions? And I'm going to come from a family or, a more systemic view of what can we do? What are some solutions that we can do to begin bridging that gap? But I'm going to stay on my black people for a minute, because I feel like I need to have this conversation with us. I feel like I need to have this conversation with us. What are some things that we can do? Number one, stop looking for validation. Stop looking for validation. Yes, we know slavery happened. Yes, we understand racism still exists in our nation. It absolutely does. We see evidence of it every day. If you're like me and you live in the South, you probably experience it more time than you really want to admit. And it's awful. I get it. It is awful. But here's what I want us to do. I want us to stop waiting on someone to validate our experiences. Stop waiting on someone to validate who you are. But guess what that means? Then you're going to have to do the work in finding out who you are. If you need to trace your roots, trace your roots. But find your identity. Find who God has created you to be. You may be like me. You can only go back one or two generations. Okay, you can, yeah, well, more than one generation. I can go back more than one, two generations, but it can only be traced back to your great grandparents or something. So what does that mean? What does that mean if you can only trace your roots back a couple of generations or 4 or 5 generations, and you can't go past your great grandparents because you don't really know a whole lot? What does that mean if you can't find that information? How then can you find your identity? How can you find your identity and then figure out or become comfortable in who you are created to be? How can you do that? Well, y'all know I'm a therapist. So the only way I know how to do it is to come from a therapeutic standpoint. And that is going through therapy, clearing out some of the things that have been going on in your life, getting past some of the generational traumatic stuff that has happened in your family, or even some of the beliefs that your family may hold or have held, that some of these unhealthy things that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation, and getting rid of some of those beliefs so that you can come into who you are right now, what you want to be, what impact you want to leave on this world. How do you want to begin shifting these things for your family? How do you want to begin empowering your family? How do you want to plant the value, the self-worth, the self-respect? How do you want to begin planting these in your children so that they can pass these values, they can pass the self-respect, that they can pass that on to their children? How can you begin right now with what you have? Not expecting that somebody's going to give it to you, because they might not. They might not validate our experiences. They just may not. But that does not mean that you are limited. It does not mean that you are helpless. It does not mean that you are powerless. You are capable to be able to create the life that you want right now. Why is that important? Why is that important? Well, you find out who you are, get settled in that, seek out careers, seek out opportunities, because opportunities all around. Move forward, get in jobs, get in leadership positions, and be able to create opportunities for other people who look like you. That's why that's important. That's why it's important. You now have the power, no matter what your family line was, no matter what your parents did or did not, no matter where your roots started at, you now have the ability to be able to create the life for your generations to come that you want to create. What can we do as a nation? What can we do as a nation? Well, to be honest with you, I don't know. I don't know if I have the answers for that. I don't really know if I have the answers for what can we do as a nation. I, you know, um, I don't think it will always start with the nation. I think sometimes it just start with individuals. And individuals can change whole nations. So if you are of the more inferior group, that's you recognizing and being aware of your privilege. But not just stopping there with the awareness, but understanding that because you are the superior, or yeah, because you are the superior race, you actually have the power to really do some damage. Like you can really start changing some laws, and you can really start making some real changes in your company. You can really, you can start pushing some diversity initiatives. You can make sure that your board members are diverse and they represent the people that you're serving, or they represent the people that work under you or that you employ. In fact, I don't shop anywhere. I don't go in a grocery store. I'm not giving my money to nowhere where I don't see that there's some diversity. So that's something that you can start doing as a nation, individual corporations and institutions, is start diversify, and don't just put it on paper. I'm not going to call out these people. I was thinking about a particular organization in my mind, but I had to, I'm not going to call them out. Okay. Not going to call them out. But don't just put it on paper. Don't just have it as something that's showing up on your website and you strategically picking, meeting a certain quota, but actually pushing diversity, actually valuing people, actually valuing or valuing individuality. That's all I have. That's all I have. Um, that's all I have. Tomorrow we'll kind of close out, y'all. I'm like 3 days away. So tomorrow's Friday, the 31st, I believe, is like a Tuesday. So I'm closing out the 30-day challenge that I did for myself, to challenge myself to come on live for 30 days straight. So I'm closing out. I'm excited. I'm excited about myself. And so over the next few days, I'll just be talking some strategies. I'll go back over some of the things just kind of that we've been talking about, just kind of as a brief review. And then we'll start talking about strategies. We'll start talking about, like, how can you start healing from trauma, or what does it look like to heal from trauma? What does it look like to to heal from sexual abuse, or what is it? We'll start talking about some real life strategies, because I don't want to just end on talking about issues. And then after that, we'll take a 2 week break, and then we'll come back and we'll do it for another 30 days. How about that? At least that is the plan. We'll take a 2 week break after the 31st. So we'll be out for the first 2 weeks of June. And then we'll come back for the last couple of weeks of June and start the 30-day challenge all over again. So I love you guys so, so much. I know this topic is probably not, popular, but I felt like we needed to talk about racism. I needed to talk about racism because it's what we see. If you're a person of color, chances are it has impacted you to some degree. And if it has, if you're like me, it has impacted me several times throughout my lifetime. Some of that may be something you need to unpack with your therapist. You may need to sit down with your therapist and unpack that. Now, you want to make sure that your therapist can hold space for you. And it is okay for you to shop around for therapists. You may ask them, hey, can I do a free 15-minute, or can I do a 15-minute? Even if you have to pay for it, it's completely fine because it's their time. But can I do a 15-minute call with you and ask you some questions? Are you trained in this? Are you trained in that? When was the last time you had some diversity training? Have you worked with other clients who looked like me? And this stuff is important, and I'm gonna tell you why it's important. Is because during I think it was it the George Floyd stuff that happened? It was the George Floyd situation, or death of murder of George Floyd. I was in therapy at that time, and it was a therapist that was of a different race. And I remember that they asked me, from how are you coping with everything, as therapists do. They you kind of check in, and I just kind of unloaded, because it's therapy. That's what you do in therapy. Like, you're supposed to share about your feelings and and what's going on in your world, in your life. And that was the last time that I went to that therapist, because their response was pretty much to tell me how they struggle with being, I'm trying to be very careful, y'all. They had their own struggles with being racist. Their family had their own struggle with being racist. And I'm like, that probably ain't something you want to tell your client who is pouring their heart out, who is Black, number one. And talking to you about this issue. George Floyd was a very, very pivotal point in our society. It was broadcast this was traumatic. This was a traumatic experience. And for you to, that was. So if you have a therapy session, or if you in therapy with someone and they're trying to work out their own issues, that you probably need another therapist. You probably need another therapist, because what I'm not gonna do is pay my therapist for me to do therapy with them. And it's their therapy and it's not mine. No, we're not doing that. So if you need some help with how and what tools that what do you look for when you choosing therapists, then message me, ask me if you have any questions. Please get at me and let me know. DM me. You can DM me. You can email me at Tiffany@drtiffanyross.com. But I love you guys so much. I'll see you here tomorrow at 12 noon. Hopefully all my systems cooperate. I see you here at 12 noon. Have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Thursday. Bye.